Greetings. I'm Sheffield Hale, and I'm president and CEO of this fine institution, the Atlanta History Center, and want to welcome you to this year's 2023 Isenberg Lecture, featuring Mary Louise Kelly in conversation with Lisa Rayam. We'll be discussing Mary Louise's recently published memoir, It Goes So Fast, The Year of No Do-Overs. You could purchase a copy for 25% off in the lobby, and she'll also be available for book signing after this, after the conversation. We hope that you'll support Ms. Kelly and the Atlanta History Center by purchasing a copy or two. It's great for the holidays. They're coming soon. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Flag Day, it's all good. I want to extend my appreciation to WABE, our local NPR station. We very much appreciate everything that they do. And NPR is such an important part of our community and the ability for us to have news that is curated in a positive way. And so we very much appreciate everything that they do for the community. And tonight is really special because we get to welcome a superstar back to Atlanta. Mary Louise Kelly, she's from Atlanta. A lot of her family, her mom's here. A lot of her family and friends are all here. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming out tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ned Montag, chair of the Isenberg Lecture Fund, to tell you more about Sidney and the Isenberg Lecture Series, and to introduce tonight's moderator, and then we'll start the conversation. So thank you again. Buy a bunch of books and silence all your cell phones. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Ned Montag. I'm the chair of the Isenberg Lecture Series. The lecture series was established as a loving tribute to Sidney Isenberg, who was an Atlanta psychiatrist for many decades, just before his 75th birthday in 1995. The group of people who gathered crafted a mission statement which says, the Isenberg Lecture Series have been established by friends, colleagues, and family as an expression of love and appreciation for Sidney's values and commitment to the healing process and to the advancement of learning and growth, affirming Sidney's conviction that the human relationship is the agency through which change comes about. Sadly, Dr. Isenberg is not with us. We lost him in 2011 at the ripe age of 90. And though he never married, he's survived by many family members, and some of who have attended many of these lectures and who may be here tonight, as well as friends. He was a good friend to me and to others here, and he made a big difference in a lot of lives. I want to thank Sheffield, who you've put up with already. He's a great CEO for the History Center, and they do terrific events like this. His colleagues, Claire Haley and Carter Jackson, have put this all together. They've done more than anyone else in the room, so my thanks to them. I want to thank a few founding members and mention a few of our prior speakers, and I'll get out of your way. The original members of this committee include Ann Bell, Paul Thiem, Bobby Leff and her husband Michael, Francis Clark and Jim Roper, Brenda Raymond and her late husband Paul, Marvin and Rona Speiser, John and Estelle Johnston, and the late Bradley and Ann Hale. These were great people who were wanted to share the growth they experienced with Sidney with many others. Forgive me if I've missed a member. I think I've got everybody. I want to brag a little on our speakers. The first speaker we had was Ken Burns. We've had James McBride, Paul Hendrickson, Taylor Branch, Calvin Trillin, Peter Kramer. We've had Judith Viorst twice, and she brought her husband the second time. We've had Eric Weiner, Drew Weston, Ashley Merriman, Melissa Fay Green, Andrew Solomon, Jennifer Senior, Abigail Thomas, George Hodgman. We had J.D. Vance after he released his very well-received book. We've had Kelly Corrigan, and we've had Elliot Ackerman in 2019. We did not operate for the last couple of years, so I'm glad we're back together. So let me give a brief introduction to Lisa Rayam and get out of your way. Lisa is a working mom. She has a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old, so she knows what it's like to be in the media and raise children. She is a broadcast pro. She's host of Morning Edition here in Atlanta. You can hear her pretty much every weekday from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And she has had 20 years, or a little more than that, at Fox 5 here in Atlanta, so you'll probably recognize her if you've been here that long. And during her tenure there, she really developed a fine reputation as a great reporter and a terrific anchor. She has a lot of experience on radio and TV, has won a number of awards for reporting, community service, and she's our host tonight. So let me ask Lisa to come out here and introduce you to our author.
Thank you for that warm welcome. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm supposed to be over here. Good evening. What a wonderful turnout. Give yourselves a round of applause. I tell you, I'm just as excited as you are. You all, some of you have had your books signed already. Raise your books if you have your books in hand. All right. Oh my gosh, everybody. Gosh, you're going to be really excited about this. A lot of people have books out there. Thank you for that, because it'll make the evening even more exciting. A lot of you have met our guest of the hour, and I'm just going to say, sit back, relax, pretend like you're in your living room with a glass of wine, maybe out on the deck, maybe, and we are just going to sit and chat about parenting, about children, about life. How about that? Many journalists dream of, let's say, traveling into war-torn countries, right? And that's true. Many journalists do. That's the prime job that you can get, and telling those stories of conflict, and more importantly, the unique stories of the people that it affects. Mary Louise Kelly, she doesn't have to dream. She has been there. She has done all of that. She is currently the host of NPR's All Things Considered. She also served as the national security correspondent for NPR for more than 2 decades. She is an author, of course, and tonight we will delve into her 3rd book. She's a mother of 2 wonderful boys. She loves to run, and more importantly, she is a Georgia native. She is home tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mary Louise Kelly.
Thank you.
Mary Louise, everybody's so excited to see you.
Yay.
And I tell you, almost everybody raised their hand and they had a book in hand.
Well, can I see? I missed it.
Yeah.
Books. Yay,
Look at that.
you.
Look at that. And before we get underway, you have some exciting news to tell us.
I wanted to say thank you to you for agreeing to do this. This is a total
It's
pleasure
my
and
honor. It was my honor.
And hold on, let me tuck this behind me. I have a tiny bit of news to share, if you will indulge me, which is that as I was climbing into an Uber to come here tonight, my phone rang, and it was my publisher in New York who wanted to tell me this book has been out in the world. The New York Times just popped their bestseller list, and we've hit it.
Wow.
And thank you. I say we because to share that news in my hometown is quite something. I learned to write in Atlanta, and I learned to read in Atlanta, and when I was a girl growing up here in the 70s and 80s, I dreamed of being a writer and journalist, and dreamed of being somebody with a story that was worth telling, and the words and the space to tell it, and that people might want to read or listen. And so it's quite something to be able to say that tonight. And the last thing I will say, there's a million people to thank, but there's actually one person here tonight who I would like to thank, and it's my mom. Where are you? Where's my mom?
There she is, right there.
I know that probably 90% of you are here tonight because Carol Kelly told you to come. Mom, you always told me I could do anything I wanted to do, that I could live any life I wanted to lead, and I believed you. And I've taken risks along the way because I knew that you would catch me when I stumbled, if I stumbled. And you have. And you do still. And I'm 52 years old and you're still catching me. So this is for us. And thank you.
So I didn't know.
All right.
I didn't know we were going to start off teary-eyed and everything. But let me tell you about her mother. We were walking over to the auditorium here, and I heard her saying she's worried about if you got enough sleep, and she's worried about if you're okay. And I just love that. It just gave me chills to hear her worried about her little girl. So that's a wonderful testimony there. I want to say thank you for all the mothers, working mothers, specifically journalists, for writing this book. It's been called a gift as well. And I want to start at the beginning with the title, because when I got the book in the mail, it gave me chills. It goes so fast, the year of no do-overs, a mother's nightmare, right? How did you come across this for the title? How did this come about?
I was staring down the last year that my oldest son was going to be at home with me. I have two teenagers. My oldest was 17, turning 18, and so going into his last year of high school and thinking about applying out to colleges, and I knew it was the last year he was guaranteed to live in my home, the last year that the four of us, my family, were going to be intact and under the same roof. And I was thinking hard on the trade-offs and the choices and the deals I've cut with myself over the years. And the specific example that I just kept circling and pacing was this child, James, loves soccer, like loves soccer. My earliest, some of my earliest memories of before he could walk, he would like have one of those Nerf Pee-wee balls and he'd be chasing it across the floor and crawling to pick it up, and my husband would be scolding him, saying, "Can't use your hands, that's a red card, like, find another way." And he'd like headbutt the ball and crawl after it. So fast forward, he's going into senior year of high school, and he was a starting striker on his school varsity team, and their games, which he lives for, are weekdays around 4 o'clock. And I have a conflict on weekdays at 4 o'clock, which is that All Things Considered goes on air, and so I never make the games. And every year I think, next year I'm going to figure this out, next year I'll find a way, next year I'll be there. And suddenly I was out of next year's. And the zillions of the parade of endless games where I was going to make it right the next time, I could suddenly count on my own two hands how many were left. And I thought, I'm looking at the year of no do-overs. I have no more do-overs. Like, I can't be in two places at once, and I need to make this choice. So I was thinking hard on that, and it became, I'm going to write this year in real time, and that's what I did. I wrote last year in real time to just reckon with the choices that I made that got us there and that I was making as we went.
Yeah, to amplify that a little bit, I wanted to start on page 100, if you all want to turn to it in the book. And on page 100, you describe a parent's worst nightmare. James was playing soccer, a key game, a big game. You're out of the country. You're supposed to make it there on time, but they changed the schedule because of weather, and you can't get there on time. And then you start watching your phone for the text during the game, and those texts start coming in. And you get a text from your then husband, Nick. James bullet header, which means it was the game of a lifetime.
Yep.
He hit that golden goal, as it says, and you weren't there.
Yeah.
And so you wept.
Yeah.
Talk about that conflict and how that set the stage for this book and how it really is the foundation. You want to be a good enough mother, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Well, no matter how hard you try, there are only 24 hours in a day, despite my best efforts. And despite my best efforts, you cannot be in two places at once. And many times, in trying to balance a family that I love with a career that I love, you can't be in Ukraine covering a war and at the soccer game at the same time. That particular soccer game was part of the year of no do-overs, and what made it especially frustrating was I had showed up for every damn game that season, including the really bad ones, the shoulder dislocation one and the rain out ones, all of them. I'd been there. I took a significant chunk away from the anchor desk and off air because I wanted to prioritize that his senior year. And I think there were 2 at the very end that I was away. And yes, it turned out to be, I knew it was going to be an important game. And while I was away, they won a game that ended up making this for the league championship, the whole regular season championship. And it was tied, and it was tied, and it was tied, and they run out of regular time, and it's still tied, and so they go into golden goal overtime. And James scores with a header. And the texts that are lighting up my phone
I
are
was
from
going to say
other
the parents. I mean,
saying,
they're just kind of
the
needling
goal
you
of
a
a
little bit.
lifetime, you must be so proud, he'll never forget this. And it's
You gotta hate it. You're right, because the
greatest
parents.
moment in my years at the school. I'm like, you've been at the school 7 years. This was the greatest moment. And yeah, you do feel that feeling of, I'm so proud of him.
Right.
So delighted for him, so happy for the team, of course. So furious at myself that I had promised this was the year of no do-overs, and I didn't show up. The coda to that story, which is worth just very briefly telling, is I beat myself up after that and felt shame that I hadn't managed to be there, and it was over, and that was it. We'd won the league. And then I get back to DC, and my son announces, oh no, that wasn't the most important game ever, because now it's the state championship. And what followed was 2 more weeks of intense training. The state championship was on a Sunday afternoon, which is great because I can go because it's not a weekday at 4 o'clock. And I went, and if you were my editor, you would nix this chapter because you'd be like, this is so Hallmark Channel, it's so improbable. But once again, the state championship went into overtime, and my son scored.
And you were there. And you were there.
And the coda to the coda is that driving home from the game, I called my mom here in Atlanta to tell her we won and James had scored. And I told her the whole play-by-play, the whole game in endless detail. And she listened and listened and listened. And the first thing she said wasn't for James, her grandson. It wasn't, about the soccer. It was for me. She said, oh, you were there. You were there. I know how much that means, and you were there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you and I were chatting, and just how many of the games you get too late, how you try to get to that concert and you just miss it.
Yeah.
And you pretend like you were there, the whole time. Yes, I've done that a few times. The theme of your book is also about sacrifice, though. And you kind of had to give yourself a break. On page 45, you said, I can't actually think of a crucial birthday or a camp drop-off that I missed, an absence that I'd be embarrassed to explain to a kid. But then you get a little harder on yourself. You talk about the little things that you miss, that the play dates I skipped, the pool parties that I missed, the school pickups, the chance to hear all the chatter from the back seat, the morning baking cookies when it was the nanny in the kitchen instead of me. To all the mothers out there, how important is it to give ourselves a break? Because you had to find that place where you had to give yourself a break.
Yeah. That's, a theme that you will feel me wrestling with throughout the book is I think it's relatively easy to, the big birthday, the big thing that you can put on your calendar. I can schedule for that and I will be there. It's all the little moments, and we know this, but those are the ones that add up to a life, to the life that you are leading. I did learn to be more gracious to myself in writing this, and thought about a moment when I had run into another reporter on the streets in DC, who also had a toddler, and we covered the same beat. She worked for a rival news organization. She was really good. She'd scooped me a bunch of times. And at the moment that I ran into her, I had stepped away from NPR because my younger son had some medical issues that we needed to deal with, and he needed a parent. I couldn't be delegated to a babysitter, so in my mind, I had taken a year's leave from NPR. I think NPR thought I was just gone. They were not holding a job for me, and it wasn't clear I could go back. But in my mind, I was taking a year's leave. I'm pushing my son down the street in his stroller. And this other woman, I pass her on the sidewalk. I say hi, and she doesn't recognize me. And I look at her, and she looks like she always does, in killer heels and this great suit, and she was, And I will always remember applesauce matted in my hair, and she didn't even recognize me.
Wow.
And we chatted for a few minutes, and then she turned to go because she had an interview at the White House, and she needed a taxi, and she ran off. And as she got in the taxi, I felt like I had been slapped.
Right.
Not by her, but by what she represented, which is what I thought I was supposed to be doing with my life. And I loved my son, knew that what I was doing with him was important. But in that moment, I didn't really recognize myself. It was just such a different life than I thought I had chosen. Fast forward, the next time I run into this woman, it's a couple years later maybe, some time has passed. I have gone back to the newsroom. I'm covering the Pentagon. I run into her again on the sidewalk. She recognizes me. We chit-chat for a few minutes, and we're turning to go our separate ways, and she said, "Hang on, I just want you to know, I cried the whole day after I ran into you." Mm-hmm. I said, "What? Like you looked fabulous. You had you were off to the White House. You'd won. You had it all and all at once, all the things." And she said, "I had stuffed myself into Spanx and this uncomfortable suit, and I was off to do, I can't even remember what the story was because it was so many news cycles ago, and I had sent my own toddler to daycare and was paying a stranger to take her to the park that day." And she said, "I looked at you and your son, and y'all were so happy, and you were singing to him." And we kind of looked at each other, and I said, "You and me both, sister." I mean, we were both beating ourselves up for failing to do what is in fact impossible. You cannot do it all at once. You cannot be in two places at once. And if all it was required of me was to see myself the way she did, through her eyes. This happy mom taking her son to the park. The world didn't care if I had applesauce in my hair or she had great heels. Nobody cares.
Wow.
We were both doing just fine.
Right. So many of us in the industry look up to you because you are in Pakistan and Baghdad, getting those great stories that we hear about on NPR. What were those days like for you? Were you really present in the moment, or were you always worried about what was happening at home with the boys?
Both. It's not either or. I'm a reporter's reporter, and I love being out in the world and talking to people who I would never get to meet as me, Mary Louise Kelly, but who will take my questions because, of the news organization I represent and the audience they want to reach. And being in the field is probably like the only time I feel zero guilt because I just, back home probably, the dryer is still clanking and, carpool is falling apart, but there's nothing I can do about it from Pakistan. So I can just do the work. There's such singularity of purpose. That said, I have a vivid memory of being in Ukraine last year and going into Donbass in eastern Ukraine, and we were trying to get as close to the Russian front lines as we could. And I am texting with my younger son about the dog's grooming appointment because he's so overdue.
in
I
Ukraine.
had this moment where we're getting the security briefing about, how we're going to carry our body armor in, and I'm like, hang on, I just have to text the doggy daycare spa in DuPont Circle to get it done, and think so. There is no multitasker like a mother
Oh,
in
my
a war
gosh.
zone, and
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I'm always worried about my kids.
Yeah,
Is the
yeah,
long and short of
yeah.
it. I'm always worried about it.
Oh, yeah.
Always.
In the book, you recall an incident where you tried to land this big interview in Russia, and you finally landed this interview, and the confirmation date lands right in the middle of a family vacation. What do you do?
So this is the thing, is that it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
I have had a career that I have loved and find such meaning and purpose in, and it's in my bones to be a journalist. And I know that that has led me to choices that I now look back on with my family and think, was I present enough? Did I do okay? But it does cut both ways, and there are interviews and assignments galore that I have turned down. That one in question, it wasn't just a big interview in Russia, Lisa. This was the height of the whole Mueller investigation, Trump, Russia, and I had done reporting in Russia and covered the intelligence beat, and I had been asking for the head of Russian intelligence, the head of the SVR, which is like their answer to the CIA. This is a person who does not often give interviews, particularly in the middle of all that, particularly to an American news organization. And for reasons that were not then or now clear to me, the answer came back, yes. And they gave a date, and we scrambled, and I had a producer, and we were all ready to go, and were working to get visas and hop on the plane. And then they came back and changed the date and put it right in the middle of a family vacation. And it was a logistically complicated family vacation where I couldn't just have turned up 3 days late. It's all or nothing. And I looked at it and looked at it and then wrestled with it and then thought, ultimately, there's somebody else who can do that interview. There's another journalist who can do that interview. There's nobody else who can be a mom to these kids and do this trip. And so I turned down the interview and went on the family vacation. And it was a phenomenal family trip. And when I'm a very, very old woman someday, I will be beating my head on this stage in frustration.
How much did you think about that interview on vacation, though? There's an instance in the book where your son, James, asks you to move Dad's car.
Oh, my God.
And in that moment, you just realize maybe my guilt is just overwhelming for no reason, because you had been out of town for how many days, and your son didn't know that you were gone.
I live in Washington. I had come here for a long weekend. It was my brother's birthday, and my phone rings. It's Sunday morning. I'm running right near here, actually, and it's James, my oldest, in Washington, saying, "Can you move Dad's car off the driveway? It's blocking me." I said, "No, James, I can't move Dad's car." "Mom, I have SAT prep. I'm late. I got to go now. Why can't you move Dad's car?" I'm like, "James, I can't move Dad's car because I'm not in Washington and haven't been for 4 days. You didn't note for 4 days? There's only 4 people who live in this house. I would like to think if one of you disappeared for several days, I would notice." And there's a long pause, and then he said, "Fine, I'll go find out." And I thought, first of all, did you really not, you didn't miss me at all?
At all, yeah. It's boys, I'm telling you, boys are like that.
If the issue is your father's car, and your father is in the house, why are you calling me? I think mothers are the default for everything.
Yeah. Another telling story is...
can I just say, I asked the boys to read the key chapters where they feature, and they had veto power over the stories that were told, because I didn't want to put anything into the world that they were uncomfortable with. And that was the story where James was like, "Oh my God, I look like such a jerk." Is America going to cancel me if you publish this? Sleep on it. I think people will think it's funny. Tell them it was funny.
Another cute story is that you put up a calendar. You went on another one of your trips that you do for NPR to cover one of the big national stories that we grow to depend on and hear on All Things Considered. And you put up a calendar to the number of days that you would return home.
Yeah.
And you wanted your sons to put an X on each day, saying, Mom's going to be home on such and such a day. And you don't believe they did. You don't believe they looked at the calendar. What does that say, to you about, worrying about them way too much, or not enough, or just, giving yourself a little more grace as a mother?
I was headed to Pakistan, actually, to the Pakistan-Afghan border, and I was going to be away 2 weeks, and the boys were small. Alexander wasn't walking. They were small. And I made this pink construction paper calendar with a picture of me smiling at the top of it, and drew little smiley faces, and halfway through, and Mom's almost home.
Mom's almost home.
They had a marker, and they were supposed to mark off the days so they could keep track and know that I was coming home, and by the time they got to the last square, Mommy would be back. And you're right, I don't think they ever looked at it. I think either the babysitter or my husband, as I'm coming home from the airport, quickly filled it in. So terrible, but I had forgotten about it, and I found it in a file when I was looking for something else as I was writing the book. And I held it, and I wish I could go back and tell my frantic, frazzled, hanging on by my toenails mother of a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, savor this moment. Because what that calendar was a testament to my belief that I stood so utterly at the center of their world. They would need to mark the days until I came home. There's no one I could make that calendar for now. I mean, my teenagers love me, but they're not going to be.
They're not going to mark a calendar.
My friends love me, my mom loves me, but she's not marking a calendar until she sees me again. And that is such a gift. And I wish I could go back and tell myself, I mean, you know it in the moment, but you will never be loved and at the center of someone's world in the way that you are if you're a parent of a very young child. That doesn't come around again.
Wow.
And to look back and realize that's where we were. And also, was I really at the center of their world? Because I'm not sure, as I say, that they ever actually looked at the calendar. But I look back and I think I was trying so hard.
Yeah.
I was trying so hard, trying so very hard.
You mentioned your son, Alexander, and there's a chapter in the book called Chapter 0. And as any mother knows, when you give birth, they have the lifeline. If you get as Mark 10.
The APGAR score.
Yeah, the APGAR score. It's perfect. And his came in at 0. And that was a pretty profound moment for you as a mother, and even moving forward in your career. He's healthy and happy now, but when you look back, what sacrifices would you have made? Because you kept working. Once you knew he was past, the critical zone, you kept working. Does that weigh on you now? Do you have regrets about that? Should you have stayed home more? Should you have been with him? Should you have held him more?
Alexander was an incredibly difficult delivery, and I knew that. And he was in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, for a long time after he was born. And when we finally brought him home, they handed us the envelope of discharge papers. And I think I was so overwhelmed. I had a 2-year-old at home. I had a sick newborn. I took a long time to recover from that delivery as well. And I must have taken that fat envelope of discharge papers and thrown it into the medical file and gotten on with the task at hand of trying to get 2 babies fed and all the rest. I had never actually opened the envelope. And as I was going back to fact check another detail for the book, I came across it. It's the very first thing in Alexander's medical file, because it's the first medical paperwork I ever got. But we never opened it. And so I thought, well, I'll open this, and can't be that urgent. We've lived this long without it. I'll just look at it, read it. chuck it in the bin, move on. I opened it, and because I had passed out during the delivery, I had never known that he was born a 0 on the AFGAR. He was born not alive, and he stayed that way for several minutes. It's not clear from the file how long he went without breathing or heart rate or anything. But it was very much more touch and go than I had been told, or than I had realized. And I thought about that, and I thought about reading it, my hands were shaking, even knowing how it turned out, the happy ending, that he's fine. To read about your child in such profound distress, even in the past tense, is hard. And I thought about, my God, like, had I known that, would I have gotten on that plane to Pakistan before he could walk? Would I ever have let him off my lap if I'd known how close I came to losing him? And the answer, to be completely honest, is yes. I would have gotten on that plane, partly because he was crawling off my lap no matter what I did. You can't hold him. That's the point. And that's the goal, is you want them to be crawling away.
Right.
And I would have been a different mother if I hadn't gotten on that plane. But I am very interested in wrestling with the notion of two competing or seemingly contradictory ideas. And as I thought about it, I thought, I do not regret getting on that plane. But if you sharpen the question, do you regret leaving your kids for a couple weeks? Yeah, I do. I still do, every time.
You're not alone. A lot of us, feel the same way. Just to give you some perspective of how much of Atlanta she is, Mary Louise Kelly used to jog in front of the Atlanta History Center all the way to OK Cafe, right? And I mentioned that because that's so much of your father. You were daddy's girl.
Yeah.
Talk about, you've shared your love for your mother. You have great parents. Talk about your father and how close the two of you were. He passed his love for running on to you and so many other things. Did he ever counsel you about parenting and being that good enough mother?
All the time, and he lived it. And part of the exercise of this book was, I'm thinking about what I'm passing on to my kids and thinking about what I inherited from my own parents, and the way we choose to live our lives among the generations. My father, some of you in this room knew, was an attorney in Atlanta for decades and raised my brother and me in Atlanta and taught me all kinds of things, from how to run, how to be a runner and be okay calling myself that, how to mix a really, really great Manhattan, and the recipe is in the book.
Really? Okay.
He, toward the end, he battled cancer for 17 years. And toward the end, the very last walk I ever went on with him, when he was very sick, he was, to the very end, telling me things he wanted me to know. You got to take care of the boys. You got to make time. You got to take care of your husband. You have such good boys. My dad could talk. Like, once you got him going, it was you were going to be there for a while. And he asked, and I think I kind of knew this might be the last walk because he was struggling. And he was saying, "Do you think the boys would like to learn more carpentry?" I said, "What? That's what?" I have some wood from Home Depot in the garage in Atlanta, and I'm thinking it would be really good. They need to learn more about using power tools. And then he went into great detail about the specific power tools on which he would be instructing them, and I'm listening, and I'm listening, and I'm listening, and I just looked at him and thought, we're talking about power tools, but what you're saying, what I'm hearing is, I love you. Aww. I love you. And we lost him 7 weeks later, and I took his hammers from his workbench here in Atlanta. My parents, for many years, lived just on Habersham right here, and I took his hammers, and they were not power tools. They were the really old school, like
rusty old hammers with the wood. Yeah.
And I took them back to DC with me, and they will stay with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Peachtree Road Race.
Yes.
What kind of memory does that jar in your mind when it comes to Dad and you running?
My dad ran the Peachtree Road Race, and the expectation was that unless you were extremely elderly or extremely pregnant, you would too, if you were a member of the Kelly family. And there were really no other exceptions granted, and I tried. He ran it many, many, many years. I ran it quite a few years with him, and including during the pandemic when, as some of y'all know, it went to virtual and then to hybrid. I have just signed up. I will be here on July 4th because that is what Kellys do on July 4th. You show up and run the Peachtree Road Race.
Awesome.
And I wrestled with that. We lost him in 2021, and that summer was just weird because the race was virtual and it was all totally weird. I really hesitated over whether to sign up. I didn't know if I could run it without him. I never had. And this past year, I ran it with my brother, also a Kelly, and it was easier. And I've thought about that, and I think part of it is the passage of time. The pain is there, the grief is there, but it's, it gets a little duller and a little less sharp. But I also, I see him in my brother, and I see him in my sons, and I don't know that that's a bridge I'm ever actually going to have to cross to run that race without him. It was hot as hell, as it always is in Atlanta on July 4th, and as I was flagging and thinking, why did I do this? Why was this a good idea? I heard my dad's voice, and he was saying, you got this. I'm with you, buddy. Keep going. Don't quit. Almost there, we're nearly home. And I will hear his voice again when I run this summer.
Awesome. What would your father say to you, knowing the conflicts that you've written about in this book? What would he say to you? That you have been that good enough mother?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope that, I think we all try to live our lives and conduct our careers in ways that our family can be proud of, and I've tried, and it's a work in progress, certainly. But I think he would join my mother in saying, you go do what you came to do. He's always encouraged me in my work and in my career. There was one letter my senior year of college where I think he had a brief panic, like, is she ever going to be able to support herself? And there was a strong encouragement to take the LSAT and become a lawyer.
Become a lawyer?
Stated encouragement.
Oh, boy.
And I didn't, and
look at you now.
Worked out.
Right. There's a chapter in the book, and we're going to wrap up so you all can ask questions as well, but it's called Letting the Silence Play Out. And I was reading the chapter, and I was thinking, okay, this is about how you tune out your kids, at a certain age, you pretend like you're listening, and they're chattering about all sorts of things. And I went back and I said, no, she's talking about really losing her hearing. In the midst of all of this, trying to be a great journalist, great anchor, great mother, you lose your hearing. How did you navigate all of that?
Well, you don't have a choice, unfortunately. I have severe to profound hearing loss in both ears. I'm listening to you now wearing hearing aids. In both ears, and I anchor All Things Considered every night wearing hearing aids and couldn't do it without them. And I am 50, I just turned 52, and I got these a decade ago when I was in my early 40s, and had noticed that everyone mumbled all the time. Women in particular, which I now know is because I have more serious hearing loss at higher frequencies, and women's voices are pitched higher. I noticed that I was watching TV with the subtitles on all the time. I noticed that I had gotten into a kind of contentious relationship with our FedEx delivery guy, 'cause he kept saying, I rang the doorbell, you never answered the sign for it. I'm like, I was home, I would have heard the doorbell. So there were things like that, but it became undeniable because I was so young. I kept thinking, I'm like, I can't need hearing aids. I'm 41. I was at an event like this and was on stage and people were asking questions and it became apparent everyone else could hear the questions and I could not, and it was mortifying. And in the taxi home after that, I thought, enough.
Gotta do
I need to
something.
go look at this. And I would say, just as a public service announcement, it takes an hour to go to an audiologist. It's covered by most insurance plans, and then you have a baseline. And for me, the particular issue I have is its volume. It helps me to have sound amplified and louder, but the main thing is I have lost the ability to distinguish between consonants. So, may I offer you a cut of water or a cub of water? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and think we're talking about a cup of water, and I feel like I can hear the difference, but I can't actually, outside of context, I can't hear it. And when you go and do a proper hearing test, at least for me, what they have done is there's a test where the audiologist just says a word and you repeat it. So he would say void, and I would say void, ditch, ditch, shoebox, so on. And the first time I went, I got 16 out of 20, which isn't perfect, but isn't like, non-functioning. And then he repeated it, void, ditch. And when I couldn't see his lips, I missed 70%. 70% of the words without being able to see lips and without context. And they gave me hearing aids pretty much on the spot. And it was utterly life-changing and has allowed me to carry on doing work that I love and would not otherwise be able to do. And so far, I can do my job fine. I have to do it a little bit differently than some of my colleagues, and I've had to ask for some accommodations. And
Are you in there? Are you in the studio with the headphones and everything?
the
Is that how
headphones on, but ironically, in the studio, it's like the greatest place on earth if you have hearing loss because it's utterly professionally soundproofed.
Okay, the room.
If you have trouble hearing, you know how much worse it is in a crowded restaurant or a bar where there's background noise, and I'm trying to crank my hearing aid so I can hear you, but that's making the cacophony of everything else louder, and it's a nightmare. In the studio, there is no background noise.
Wow.
Totally pin drop silent, and I'm wearing big professional headphones, and I can turn them to the volume I need. That's easy. Being in the field, trying to interview somebody in the middle of a protest. I'm being here in the summer of 2020, trying to cover the racial justice protests, in the wake of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And the easy solution is to tell somebody get closer, come and shout. And when somebody's in a mask and you don't want them to get any closer because COVID, it's a challenge. So we've had to find ways around situations like that. But so far, I'm able to do it. My hearing gets a little bit worse every year. And I don't know if it will eventually stabilize, but so far it has been manageable. And with the support of colleagues who have been phenomenal, keep doing it, carrying on.
Wow, it's amazing that you carry on the way that you do. And you talk about the conversations that you now picked up from your children. Now that you're able to hear what they're talking about in the back seat,
Which is a mixed blessing.
Which is a mixed blessing. To quickly wrap up our portion before we go to questions, just to confirm that you have done a fabulous job as being a mother to these two wonderful boys. There's a passage in the book. It's on page 45. And you just wanted to check, you were trying to think about all the things that you missed and just wondering and just trying to rate if you've been that great mother. And you said, I'm just gonna ask one of my sons. And to check my memory, I cornered James in the hall one day. Can you think of a time when you needed me and I didn't come because I was working? He gives me a searching look, then stares at the floor for so long that I'm convinced he's about to really let me have it. At last he looks up. I'm sure there have been, but I can't think of any. Can I have $15 to go to Chipotle? Give her a round of applause. You have been a good enough mother. At this time, we'd like to open up the floor for audience questions.
So thank you. This is an honor to see you and to be here. I love the book. I've also read your other books. And I was curious if you always knew you were going to write books, or was it that you took a break from being a reporter and you found yourself with time and then you decided to write a book?
Yeah. So the question about did I always know I wanted to write books? I think I always hoped and dreamed that I would. And what I love doing about it is it's such a very different challenge from my day job. My day job, we put a 2-hour news magazine on the air every night, but that breaks down to, depends on the day, but like 20 stories, 20 different interviews, features, et cetera. So you're dealing with things in 3, 4, 5-minute chunks, maybe 8 if it's a great interview. And the challenge to hold somebody's attention for that period of time is so different than trying to hold somebody's attention for the hours that it's going to take you to commit to a book and stick with it. So I loved the challenge of being able to do that. I loved the challenge, I love words, obviously. And on radio, that's all you've got is just somebody's voice. And can you keep them engaged or not before they find something else to do? I love the challenge of putting the words on the page. I will say that writing this book was the first one where I was trying to do it while working full-time, on All Things Considered. And I found myself every day, whichever one I was doing, the grass was so much greener. When you're writing a book, particularly with my fiction, you're always trying to figure out, is this character plausible, likable? Is this plot twist remotely plausible? And how much detail should I put in to keep somebody engaged? And with journalism, you don't have to worry about any of that. I don't have to care if you find this character or this plot twist plausible. It's what happened. It's the facts. I'm going to tell you. We move on. And when I'm doing my day job on days where nobody returns the call, nobody agrees to go on the record, I don't have any facts, deadline is looming, and it's an hour away, and then it's 10 minutes away, and it's a minute away, and I don't have the story, and I'm thinking, God, if I could just make this up, it'd be so much easier. So it is very much the grass is always greener.
Another question here.
Hi, very excited to be here. I'm halfway through, and I'm loving it so far. I just got through the Mike Pompeo part, and it was riveting. And so I was wondering, has there ever been a time out when you're reporting? I love your reporting when you're out on location, and these interviews you have are just so moving and sometimes in really tough situations for these people. Has there been an interview you conducted where it had something to do with a parent and their children and kind of made you look back at your own experience and maybe even inspired writing this book?
Yeah, great question about when I'm out in the world reporting people. Has there been a conversation or a person that inspired me to think differently about my own parenting? Because in writing this book, I could have written a straight journalism memoir, or I could have written something straight about being a mom. But as with all of our lives, those two strands are messy and complex, and I couldn't figure out a way to write about one without writing about the other, because being a mom has so changed and informed how I do journalism, and the reverse. A recent story that speaks to your question: in Ukraine last year, in the run-up to the war and the Russian invasion, so like late January, early February of last year, we were interviewing everybody we could find and asking, kind of the unanswerable, but what do you think is going to happen? What plans are you making? What are your fears for your country? And most people were scared to death and we're packing emergency go kits and trying to figure out evacuation plans for their families. How were they going to get out if the worst came to pass, as it of course has. And one of the people who I interviewed who will always stick with me and who really caused me to think deeply about some of my own choices is a woman named Hannah Hopko, who I had sought her out because she was one of the original leaders of the 2014 revolution, the pro-democracy protests. And she became a nationally prominent figure and had run for parliament and had ended up chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So this is a woman with big stuff going on in her life. And when I interviewed her, she was stressed about Russia and invasion and sanctions and all the rest. But what was seriously stressing her out was that her 11-year-old daughter had been begging for a guinea pig, like a pet guinea pig, and she promised that she would buy the guinea pig. Now she was having second thoughts because she's like, if Russia really does start raining missile strikes down and I have to evacuate, I'm going to be stuck with a rodent. Trying to get the rodent out to Poland with like the food and the cage and the pellets, and how's this going to work? She starts crying. She said, I promised my daughter, and this is not her fault. She didn't do anything wrong. This is Putin's fault, and my daughter deserves the guinea pig. We're in this pizzeria in Kyiv, and she's weeping. Mm-hmm. And I started crying, just thinking, there's not a parent on this planet who would not relate to like that is the thing that has just that is like breaking you in this moment. And I've interviewed her multiple times since then because I just wanted to hear what happened. Like, did you get the guinea pig? Like, what happened to the story? They got the guinea pig. She did have to evacuate it. The daughter made it out with grandparents through Lviv in Western Ukraine and then on into Poland. And Hannah Hopko stayed to fight and had this guinea pig. And I've interviewed her 4 or 5 times since, and we talk about troop movements and war machinery, and I've interviewed her in Washington because she's come to lobby and met with Secretary Blinken at the State Department and met with members of Congress to beg for more money and aid for her country to fight. And she makes me cry every single time because we talk about the guinea pig, and now they've adopted, the latest is they've adopted a puppy whose mother was killed by Russian bullets in Donbass in eastern Ukraine, but the puppies survived and they've adopted one. Oh my. And she's showing me the pictures and we're weeping. And I tell that story because I think about the journalist who I was before I became a mom. Mm-hmm. And if this crazy woman had started telling me about her guinea pig evacuation worries, I would have been like, what? Like, can we get back to the important stuff? Like, armies are on the march here. Let's focus. And now it's so obvious that's the story. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the story. Wow. If I'm trying to convey to Americans, like, what are the stakes here? Why should we care? How can I help you understand what I'm seeing? These people, ordinary people living through something unimaginable as Russian tanks are rolling toward them. Wow. That's the story, and it's totally changed the way I report.
So profound, wow. Claire, one more? Or 2 more? Okay. 2 more. 2 more. Okay.
Mary Louise, thank you so much. This is a real pleasure. We've listened to you for a long time, so this is quite an honor. And Lisa, we're new to Atlanta, and you've made us feel right at home since we've arrived. So thank you so much. So we're parents of young children. We have a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old, and I know you wrote this book as a mother, and you've talked up on stage about it as a mother. But I can say as a father, this really resonates with me, and it's something that we talk about a lot. So the question I have for you is, do you ever know that you're spending the right amount of time? Or have you thought about looking back? Because fortunately, we don't have to look back. We're doing it now. But we're both working parents. Right. And so this is something that we're living, and I'd love to get your opinion.
Yeah, you're right in the thick of it.
Good luck.
I certainly haven't found the answer. Yeah, good luck. I certainly haven't found the answer, and if I had, yours would be different. And if I had, it would be different from the answer from last year and different from what the answer is next year. And I have, over the course of my career, lived every permutation from like all in, I'm on the plane to Ukraine, I'm working around the clock, to I am at home full-time with my kids and not working at all outside the home, and every permutation in between, 4-day weeks, months on, months off, everything, trying to figure out, am I getting it right? Am I doing enough? How do you balance when two things that are important to you, that you love, that define you, collide? What do you do? I will say it goes really, really fast. And I think I nodded to this a few minutes ago. The idea, there is, whatever the story is, there will always be another story. This is an example from my world. And there will always be another journalist who can cover it. But there is nobody else who can be mom to my kids. There's not a single other human on this planet. And sometimes when I have faced decisions where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, there is just no perfect answer here. I think about that and think, there's only one role where I'm not replaceable here. And that has helped guide me.
Look at the cover of the book. The little shoes and the big shoes. I was telling her, my son is now a size 15. And you really think about that time in between if you've done enough. So just do the best you can. I'm sure you're doing a great job. We got one more.
Can I say one more thing in response to that? Because I appreciate your asking the question as a dad. I didn't want to write a book that's just for moms because I understand this affects all of us. I understand that nothing changes unless we're all in on the conversation. And I had a conversation that really made me think on the soccer sidelines a couple of weeks ago, right before the book published. It was my younger son's soccer teammate, who I know and who we've grown up with. And he stopped and rapped on my car windows. He was walking past after practice and said, "Hey, Mrs. Kelly, it's good to see you. I'm excited for your book coming out. I'm looking forward to reading it because I think it's really going to resonate with me." And I was like, really? Like 17-year-old sweaty jock? Really? And I didn't say that, but I must have kind of looked like it because he said, yeah, because you're writing about the struggle to be in two places at once and to be true to, the things that you hold dear, and
He got it.
about the end of things and the end of childhood, and I'm really wrestling with all this too, so I can't wait to read it. And I thought,
That's hilarious. Okay,
We're actually gonna
another
sneak
question
in.
from a familiar face down here.
How many books are you going to publish?
That's her nephew.
this is my nephew Cash, who is a second grader at Lovett. How many books am I going to publish? I hope more. And it's a great question. As I say, this is the first one I've tried to write while I was working as a journalist full-time and all the time as well. There hasn't been a lot of sleep for the last year or two, but I miss writing fiction. I like making up stories and telling them. And I think I have another novel in me, so that might be next. So thank you for asking.
She's the author of 2 suspense novels, right? Yeah. One last question.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm sitting between 2 incredibly amazing women, and I know that they both have a book in themselves, but one in particular has this amazing story to tell about her own personal life. What are your words of encouragement to her to get her started?
So the question is, and I'm paraphrasing, but if you have a story that feels worth telling, why not? I don't know if what you want to do is a book. I don't know what you have, what the vision is. I think the main thing that separates people who want to write a book from people who do write a book is that they give themselves the time and the space to prioritize and write it. There's not that much else. And I will say that, can I close by quoting a quote at the very beginning? As I was trying to give myself courage to tell some of these stories, I came across a quote from Anne Lamott, and I don't know if this applies to you, Anne Lamott, the writer. But it helped me get something out. She says, "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories." And if people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Louise Kelly. Give her a round of applause. Woo, you are awesome.